Hey, this is Jesse Tooler from BatchFrame.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to be walking you through the basics of scripting for After Effects. Now this is a two-part tutorial. The first part we're going to be going over some basic functions and things that you should know before you actually get started scripting. And in the second part we're going to be creating a simple script for After Effects just to get you started. Now you should know that this tutorial is not going to make you an expert scripter. What it is going to do is give you a basic understanding of how scripts work and what they can do, so you can create more complex scripts on your own. But it is going to require some more research on your part. Now, if you want to know some of the things that scripts can do, check out aescripts.com. This place has a ton of scripts that can do many amazing things, and you can kind of get an idea of what your scripts might be able to do. And another example, this one's from my site. The plugin that I created called Decompose is actually a script embedded inside of a plugin. So although this plugin does show up as a plugin, it's actually all based upon a script. So scripts can do amazing things within After Effects. Now, a script is not an expression. Expressions you write on layers themselves, and they are recalculated every frame of your composition to create things like animation or to link two layers. Scripts don't do that, and although they're written in the same language, they're very different. Scripts are something that you use to speed up your working process. If there's a process that you go through over and over and over again that might be time consuming or might be very repetitive, that's when you can use a script to make that process go much faster. So hopefully after watching this tutorial, you'll be able to create some of your own scripts so your workflow can be quicker and more effective. So let's get started. Now here we are in After Effects, and we're not really going to be working too much in here in this first tutorial, but I just want to show you how to open up the script editor. What you want to do is go to File, and down to Scripts, and you want to go to Open Script Editor. And this is going to open up the Extend Script Toolkit, and you might have a different version depending on what version of After Effects you're working with. And I'm just going to go to New JavaScript, and we'll maximize this. And you want to make sure that up here in this drop down you have your version of After Effects selected. So After Effects CS3 for me, and everything else you can just leave alone. Up here on the top right, these are our testing controls. The play button will run our script in a testing mode, so we can see what it does in After Effects, but we can always stop it if there's any kind of errors. So it's not going to cause any problems, and these controls allow you to test your scripts. Now, scripts for After Effects are written in JavaScript, and there is a ton to know on JavaScript. I'm going to be going through some of the very, very basic things you should know just to get you started, but if you want to expand your knowledge of JavaScript afterwards, do some searchings online for JavaScript, and there's plenty of information. Also, if you want to learn more about scripting specifically for After Effects, go to Google and do a search for the After Effects Scripting Guide and download this PDF. It's got tons of information and everything you need to know about scripting for After Effects, all the different functions, all the different parameters. It's a great resource for scripting for After Effects. Alright, now let's get started. Now, I want to talk about functions. Now, there are two very general types of functions. Functions that are built into JavaScript and functions that you create. Now, in this first part, I'm only going to be talking about functions that are built into JavaScript. In the second part, I'll show you how to create your own functions. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the alert function. And the alert function basically just tells the user something. It's going to pop up as an alert box with just an OK and text inside. So to create the alert, we type the function name, which is just alert, followed by an opening and closing parentheses. Inside here is where we're going to put our alert, and we want to end the line with a semicolon. Now, all of your lines in your script are going to end with a semicolon for the most part. There's one exception, which we'll get to later on, but for the most part, every single line in your script needs to end with a semicolon, or you might get errors, because this tells JavaScript that this is the end of a line. And if we typed more without having this semicolon, it might cause problems because it thinks that the line is still going. Alright, so now here we have our function without any parameters inside. And I'm going to run this. And you can see that we get this alert box and it says undefined. And the reason it's undefined is because we didn't put any parameters into the function. So now we're going to put our parameter in there, which is just going to be text. Now, in order for JavaScript to recognize what you're writing as text, it needs to be surrounded with quotes. So double quotes on each side, and we can type in our text. So I'm just going to type hello, and I'm going to run this again. And you can see we get our alert box and our text. So that's just the basic way of giving the user of your script information. And obviously this, pretty not very useful. But you can say things like give errors if something failed, or you can say that the process is complete. You can do many different things with these alerts. And for us in this tutorial, it's going to allow us to see that the things we're doing are working. So we'll get to that. Alright, so the next function I want to talk about is the prompt function. Now the prompt function has two parameters, but what the prompt function does is allow us to get information from the user. So the alert function allowed us to give information to the user. This one is going to give us a text box where we can type information in and use that in our code. So there's two parameters for this. Now the first is what we're asking for, and it's just going to be text saying enter this, or type in a number, type in a sentence. And this is where we're going to type what the user is going to see. The second parameter is going to be the default value. So for the first parameter, we're just going to put type a sentence. And we'll put a semicolon. And you can see, once again, I've put those inside quotations because this is text. And the second one we're going to put is our default value, also in quotes, and we're just going to put this is a sentence. So this is our example, and if we run this code, you can see here we have what we were asking for, type a sentence, and then we have our default value. This is a test. This is a sentence. And we can change this to whatever we want. And if we hit OK, we are giving what we just typed in back to the script. Now in this case, nothing else happens, so the script just ends, but we can use the data that was given to us in our script. So if, let's say, we wanted to ask for a layer name, we could ask the user to input a layer name. They type a layer name, hit OK, and that layer name is used in the rest of our script. But how do we do that? How do we store the value that they give us? Well, the way we do that is through variables. Now, to declare a variable, and that is to start a variable, basically to tell JavaScript that what we're about to type is a variable name and we want it to hold something, what we do is type var and the name. Sorry. So the name in this case is our variable's name. Now variable names in JavaScript can be set to anything. There are a couple of requirements, but for the most part they can be whatever you want. One requirement, can't have spaces. What this sees is the variable the and then a function or some other parameter called name. And since there is no name function, you're going to get an error. So your variable names cannot have separate words. If you do want to separate the words with something, instead of using a space, you can use an underscore, and that works. But the common way to separate words for JavaScript is to use what's called camel case. And this is when you start off the first word with a lowercase letter, and every word after that starts with an uppercase letter. So if we want to put the name is this is how we'd write it. First word lowercase, then each word after that starts with an uppercase letter. So that's just the common way of naming your variables in JavaScript. You can use whatever way is comfortable for you. And then after that variable, we can set it equal to something. So the name is equal to my name, whatever you want to put, or it could be a number. Now here we have the variable name set equal to 1, and this will work. There's no problem with it. However, the name doesn't really make sense because 1 isn't a name, it's a number. And that's one thing you want to keep in mind when you're creating your variable names, is you want to use names that make sense so that when you're using those variables later on, you know exactly what's inside. So here we would put something like the number. And you can get as specific as you want with these names, but the purpose of using variables is to keep it something simple, simpler than rewriting everything you wrote. So although you want these names to be very specific in what they are, you should also keep them as simple as possible. So you could write something here like the num, and that'll keep you from having to write out the whole word every time. Or you could just write num, and that works too, and you know that's a number. So think about your variable names when you create them. Keep them simple, but also keep them specific. So in this case, they're putting in a sentence. So we're just going to put the variable the text. And we want to set that equal to whatever they put in. And to do that, we're just going to put this code that we wrote, the prompt, back up onto the line after the equal sign. And what this is saying is set the variable, the text, equal to whatever they put in the prompt. And what this is going to do is whatever we type in is going to be stored in the text variable. And then we can alert it back to us just so we can see that that information was for sure stored in that variable. So to do that, we're just going to type alert, and inside the parentheses we're going to put the text. Now notice here I did not use quotation marks. That's because this is not text. We don't want to alert the text like that, and I'll show you what happens if we do this. Here's our prompt, and I'm going to type a sentence, and we get back the text. And the reason for that is because we put quotations, but we don't want the words, the text, to show up. We want the variable, the text, to show up, in which case we would have the contents of this variable alerted back to us. So I'll show you what I mean. Here we have the text without quotations. We're using that variable as a variable. Run this script. Type this is text and hit OK, and we get alerted back to us exactly what we typed in. So what we've just done is created a variable and set it equal to whatever we input. Now variables can contain more than just text. They can contain pretty much anything. They can contain numbers, sentences, a single word, a single letter. When we get into more After Effects specific stuff, they can contain layers, they can contain groups of layers. And when we get into groups, we're starting to talk about something called an array. Now a simple way to think about an array is just a list. Now let's say we have an array whose name is just array, just to keep it simple. So this is the name of our list, and inside we have several different items. And we'll put 1, 2, 3. So here's our array. It's a single list, but it contains 3 separate pieces of data. And that's what an array allows you to do. It allows you to have a single variable that contains a whole array of information. Now, the one thing that makes arrays a little bit tricky is that here you can see my list started with 1, but arrays actually start with 0. So when you're working with arrays, you have to remember that the first item in the array is item 0, not item 1. So that can be a little bit confusing when you're working with arrays, but it's important to keep that in mind. 0 is the first one, and if you only have one item in your array, it's only going to be item 0. So let's create an array. We're going to create a new variable. We'll call it the array, and we're going to set it equal to an array of data. And to do that, we're going to use 2 square braces, and we'll end our line with a semicolon. And we're just going to input some text data just so our array contains something, and we're going to type in numbers. So 0, 1, 2, and that's enough for now. And you can see that I put quotes around these, but you don't have to use that. You can put variable names, you can put numbers in here, and you don't have to use the quotes. I'm just doing that for this example. And then I'm going to alert back to us that array. And we'll run this. And here you can see that when we alerted the array, we have exactly what we put in. And you can see that they're separated by commas. Now let's say we only wanted to see the first element in that array, which is 0, and you have to remember that its index is 0. So if we wanted to see only the first element, we would type after, directly after the name of our array, no space. We have our opening and closing square brace, and inside we're going to put the index, which is just the number of the data that we want to come back to us. So the array inside the square brace, I'm going to put 0 because that's the first element, as I said. And we're going to alert this, and we'll see what we get back. You can see we just got back 0. And we can do the same thing for any of our other ones, 2. You can see we get back that data. So each one of these is a separate pocket in the array. They all contain different elements. They're all contained inside one variable, but this variable has several parts. And you can have as many parts as you'd like. And they don't have to be the same type of data either. You can see here I have text, and then I have numbers. And if we alert, let's say, the third, which will give us this number 3, you can see it alerted that number back to us. So not only can you have a ton of different information here, they also don't have to be the same type. You could have text, a layer, anything inside this array. Now, it's common practice to keep those types the same because you want to have the same type of data just to keep your data more organized, but you should know that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Alright, so now we have some basic ideas of variables, arrays, and some simple functions. Now I want to get into a little bit more complex functionality of your scripts. And we're going to start talking about if statements. Now, if statements allow you to compare. You can see if something is greater than something else, if something is less than something else, if something is equal to something else. And if your statement is true, it does one thing. If your statement is false, it does something else. So let me show you a simple example of this. And we're going to start out by typing if. Now, it's important that this is lowercase. Now, I didn't mention this before, and I probably should have. JavaScript is completely case sensitive. That goes for variable names, that goes for function names, and that goes for if statements. If you typed capital If, it's not going to recognize this as being an if statement. If you type your variables with lowercase letters one time and capital letters another time, it's not going to recognize that as the same variable. So everything in JavaScript is case sensitive. Remember that while you're writing your scripts. Okay, so like I said, we're going to type if, both lowercase, followed by opening and closing parentheses. Now inside these parentheses is where we put our test. And just to keep it simple, we're going to say is 1 less than 10. Now here we know obviously that yes, 1 is less than 10, but it'll help us see what the if statement does. So we're going to follow this by an opening curly brace. Now the way I like to write these is have the first opening curly brace on the same line as the if statement, and then return down and put the closing curly brace below. Now there's different ways that people write these. You can put the whole if statement on the same line if you'd like, or another common way is to have the opening curly brace on a line below the if statement, and then your other curly brace below that. So any of these ways will work. Just find the way that you're most comfortable with. I like to do it like this. And in between these two curly braces is where you're going to put what happens if this is true. So if this is true, we just want to alert this is true. And let's run this and see what happens. And we got back, this is true. And that's because 1 is less than 10. But let's say we change this to 11, and we run it again. Now nothing happens, because this function only runs if the statement is true. So how do we add something if this is false? Well, we use the else statement. And so after this closing curly brace, we're going to type in else, and then open back up our curly brace. So opening and closing below. And here we alert this is false. And now if we run this, you can see we get this is false. So now depending on what number we put in here, if it's true, it'll say one thing. If it's false, it'll say another. Now this right here is called an operator, and this happens to be the less than operator. However, there are many different types of operators that we can use to compare the two numbers. We're always comparing the first to the second, but we're not always seeing if something is less than another. We can see if something is greater than another, or a common one, we can see if something is equal to a number. Now, equal to is a little bit tricky. If we run this right now, we're going to get an error. And the reason for that is because what this is actually trying to do right now is set 9 equal to 10. It's not checking to see if they're equal, it's trying to make them equal. And 9 is a number which is not equal to 10, so this can't be done. It's not possible. And that's why we get the error. Let me make it a little bit easier to see by creating a variable to compare to instead of just using a number. So we're going to use var num equals 9. And we're going to put num here. So is 9 equal to 10? We run this, and now it's going to say this is true. Now why is this? It's because it's not comparing, like I said. It is setting. What this is actually asking is, can the variable num be set to 10? So no matter what we set the number up to here, it's just being changed down here, and because num can be set, it's true. To compare the numbers instead of whether it's able to be set, you have to use two equal signs, and this will give us our comparison. So now you can see this is false, and if we change num to 10, it becomes true. So there are a bunch of different comparison operators. Some quick ones that might be useful to you: not equal, exclamation point equal sign is saying is num not equal to 10, and in this case we get false because 10 is equal to 10. If we change this to 110, now we can see it's true because 110 is not equal to 10. There's also greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, tons of different operators you can use in these if statements. So just do a quick search on Google and you can get a full list of all the different operators you can use for these if statements. The last thing I want to talk about is for loops. Now, loops allow you to run a part of code many times until a requirement is reached. Now, the type of loop we're going to be talking about is called a 3-expression for loop. And that's because it has 3 parameters that we use to create the loop. Now, to start the for loop, we're going to type in for, F-O-R, and all lowercase, make sure, or else it's not going to be recognized, followed by our opening and closing parentheses. And inside here is where we're going to put the 3 different parameters. Now, the first parameter is called our initializer. And what this is a variable that has a starting value. So our starting point. So a common variable name for loops is just the letter I. So we want to initialize this variable by giving it a value. So I'm going to just say I is equal to 0. So when this for loop starts, we're going to have a variable called I with a value of 0. We're going to put a semicolon here to separate these parameters, followed by our second parameter, which is the loop test. Now before I go on, I just want to say that in this case, our parameters are separated by semicolons. However, in normal functions, such as the prompt function, the variables are separated only by commas. And that's because the for loop is a different type of function. So make sure that in for loops, your parameters are separated by semicolons. However, in your normal functions, only commas. Alright, so our second parameter is the loop test. And the loop test is a comparison just like we did in the if statement before. So we can say, is I less than 10? So in this first case, I is equal to 0. We're going to do this test, is I less than 10? And if it is, we're going to run the loop. And if it's not, we're going to pass over the contents of the loop. Now the contents of the loop are put inside curly braces. So we have opening curly brace, return, and our closing curly brace. So if this statement is true, it's going to run anything that's inside here. And if it's false, it's just going to skip over and it's going to continue on to all the rest of the code that's in here. Now there is one more parameter for this, and that is the counting expression. Basically, it's some sort of incrementer that's going to change I so that we have a different test here each time. Because if we had I stay 0, this loop would just keep on looping through because I is always going to be less than 10. And that would cause errors in your code. So we need to change I every time so that each time it's comparing a different number to 10. And to do that in this case, we're just going to use an incrementer. And what that is we're going to type in I plus plus. And plus plus is the incrementer. And what this is going to do, this is like saying I equals I plus 1. So basically we're just adding 1 to I and setting that as our new value. So the first time we go through this loop, it's going to be equal to 0. Then once it goes through once, it's going to be incremented and it'll then be 1. So is 1 less than 10? Is 2 less than 10? It's going to keep on going through that until this statement is no longer true. So just to run through this and give us some feedback, I'm going to type in alert, and we want to alert back the variable I. And we'll run this just to see what happens. And we get back 0, 1, 2, got 8, 9, and now our loop is going to end because 10 is not less than 10. So you can see it went through 10 times starting from 0 until this statement was no longer true and then it ended. And just to show you that it ended, we'll type another alert. And this time it's just going to say the script is done. And we're going to lower this number just so we don't have to go through it so many times. We'll change it to 2. We'll run it. 0, 1, and the script is done. So that is a simple example of a for loop. So that's it for this first part. Now that you have a basic understanding of some of the basics of JavaScript, we can start to get into some After Effects specific things and create our first script for After Effects. So that's it for Basics of Scripting Part 1, and I will see you in Part 2. Thanks a lot.